The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it has been written through the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, since from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and ascertained from them the time of the star's appearance. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word, for I too may go and do him homage." After their audience with the king, they set out. And behold, the star that they had seen at its rising preceded them, until it came and stopped over the place where the child was. They were overjoyed at seeing the star. And on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and did him homage. Then they opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country by another way. The Gospel of the Lord. In our household, on Christmas Eve, a small argument erupted. My children, before they went to bed, were busy putting out gifts for Santa. And it was your cookies and milk. And I tried to convince them that things have changed and that what Santa really wants is Home Depot gift cards. Of course, my youngest son, Peter, was busy setting a trap for Santa, and I told him, "That's really going to get you coal in the stockings there, buddy." It's easy to focus on gifts on this Feast of Epiphany, but I'd like to focus a reflection on Epiphany as a feast of response. A response by the Magi to the birth of Christ. A response to the gift of God himself into our world. You know, the story is a familiar one, and we can easily get distracted because it is so rich in its imagery. And in fact, much of what we popularly believe about the Epiphany, about the Magi, comes from the carol that we're going to sing very shortly after the homily here, that was written by John Henry Hopkins in 1857. "We three kings of Orient are." Well, we don't really know if they were kings. They were Magi. We don't really know what exactly Magi were. Kind of spies, information brokers, probably astrologers. We don't know that they were just three of them. We know there were three gifts. We don't really know if they came from the Orient, they came from the East. We don't know how far they traveled. And much has been written about the significance of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And we'll hear in the carol that, gold represents the kingship of Christ, frankincense that he is divine and God, and myrrh a foreshadowing of his death. Well, that could be the case too. But a lot of our popular knowledge is born out of that hymn. The Magi, too, could have easily been distracted, as we can get distracted sometimes by that Christmas carol about the story. But they left everything behind and made what was probably a very arduous journey, with all of its uncertainties, pitfalls, and obstacles that come with such a journey at such a time. The Magi were also outsiders. They didn't worship in the temple. They didn't sacrifice. They weren't part of the Jewish tradition, the Jewish religion. They were Gentiles. But they knew the prophecies, and they saw that physical sign of the star in the heavens. And when they grew closer and closer to Christ, the powers of the world wined and dined them and tried to distract them and manipulate them. It's important to think of this Feast of the Epiphany as a feast of response. And what was the response of the Magi? The response is adoration. Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage. When they come upon the baby Jesus and Mary, they prostrate themselves and do him homage. They adored Christ. They gave him adoration. That was their response, to seek him out and to bow down before him in humble adoration. And after paying God his due, they went home by a different way. The advent of Christ into our world and the advent of Christ into our hearts calls us to respond in many ways. Christ's life in us should transform our way of living. It should affect all that we do, all that we see, all that we say, all that we touch. It should affect all our relationships at home, at school, in our workplace, and in our neighborhood. And it is this advent of Christ coming into the world, coming into our lives, that also transforms and influences even those things that are most personal and intimate to us. Our sexuality, our conscience, our morals, our values. And it is this advent that comes in and transforms us and makes us different from the world, so that we go home by a different way. This calls for a response on our part. And the Magi show us an example of how to respond with adoration and homage. A deep love and a reception, a loving deeply. But it's easy to get distracted from adoring God and from paying him the homage that is due. About 10 years ago, I got ordained a deacon. And I remember at my adoration, me and my deacon-to-be buddies were all sitting in the gathering room. We're getting on our nice new vestments and kind of commenting on them. And we start talking about this point in the rite of ordination where we will lay down and prostrate ourselves before God and the bishop and before we're ordained. And we started talking about this prostration and paying God homage. And the conversation started going towards, well, I hope they've cleaned the altar area. You know, this is new stuff here. We don't want to get it dirty. And then there was a conversation about, how should we don't want to press our face into the marble. Let's everybody put their hands here, and we'll put our heads here so just the tips of our noses touches the ground. And this was the conversation we were having, and I wanted to smack them all upside the head. We're here to prostrate ourselves and to give our lives to God in service to him and to his church. It's easy to get distracted. I remember Dr. Scott Hahn giving a lecture one time talking about a dialogue he had with an Islamic cleric. And this Islamic cleric said to him, "You can't possibly believe that this piece of bread becomes your God." And Hahn said, "Yes, that is what I believe." And this cleric said, "If I believed that every time I walked into a Catholic church, I would lay prostrate on the ground before my God." Maybe he knew something that we should know. In our worship here in the church, we are reminded in little ways of the homage that is due to God, the adoration that is due to God in simple acts and even coming to church. And they're reminders of what we need to carry with us throughout the rest of the week. We walk into church, and what's the first thing we should do? Cross ourselves at the altar, grab a bulletin in case the homily is really boring and you can sneak and look at it. But we genuflect to the tabernacle. We show God homage in that way. During the liturgy, we sit attentively as learners to listen to the words of God. And we bow our heads and our shoulders at different times throughout the liturgy. Deacons and priests do this several times during the liturgy, but all of us, when we say the creed very shortly, and we hear the words, "And by the power of the Holy Spirit was incarnate of the Virgin Mary and became man," the church asks all of us to bow in humble adoration during that time. We're also asked to do a simple bow of our heads every time Jesus is mentioned, every time the Trinity is invoked, every time the Blessed Virgin is mentioned, and if there's a particular feast day we're celebrating at the name of that saint, we're to bow our heads. And as we go up to communion, before we receive the Lord in his body, if we choose to receive him in our hands, we are to do a simple bow of humble adoration. Same thing when we receive him in the cup, a simple bow. and to do this reverently. We don't do this because it's the rules of the church. And the church doesn't just put these together to say, hey, let's do a whole bunch of funky little things and make Catholics go up and down so that people can mock us for doing Catholic calisthenics. We kneel and we sit and we, do all these different things. We do it because the posture of our bodies is important. And how we adore God and honor God is important. And we do these things not because we're told to, but because we love Him. This God adores us in such a way that He becomes one of us. He made the first move. Adoration of God is adoring Him in love. Don't you spend time with people you love? Remember those feelings when you're first perhaps meeting somebody that you are attracted to or you love, and you want to spend time with that person. Abraham knew Sarah, his wife. The verb in Hebrew is yada. The scriptures also say that Abraham knew God, and it's the same verb, yada. It is a verb of intimacy. God wants to know us and to love us intimately. So do we love Him? Do we spend time with Him? Like the Magi, who put everything at risk and had everything on hold to be with God, we must ask ourselves, do I ever put things on hold for God? We have a perpetual adoration chapel here at a Holy Family. What a blessing for us as a parish to have that chapel. After the 7:30 Mass, I preached the homily there, and a couple came up to me as they were going out the door. I don't know them too well, and I think it was their daughter who was with them, and you may recognize them. Their daughter is severely handicapped, mentally and physically. She's on a respirator, she's in a wheelchair. And this couple just came to me and said, thank you for just mentioning the Adoration Chapel. And they just said, we can't get through life without spending time in that chapel. And I chatted with them a little bit, and I realized that life is a challenge for them in caring for their loved one. It's a challenge for them to feed this person, clothe this person, care for this person. But the more that life has challenged them, the more deeper their adoration and their homage to God has come. We are all on a journey like the Magi. We find our own uncertainties, pitfalls, and obstacles along our way. But our response must be like the Magi as well. One of adoration and homage. Not just once each Sunday, but every day. It cost Jesus everything to love us. Does it cost us everything to love Him? Do our lives look different from the world's? If we open ourselves to this response, it will transform us. It'll transform our morals. It'll transform our conscience, our relationships, our work, our friendships. And like the Magi, as we grow closer and closer to Christ, the powers that be will try to distract us, manipulate us, and use us. But if we open ourselves to a life of adoration and homage, we will find ourselves going home by a different way.